Imagine this, you're about to ignore a penny on the ground. It's dusty, worn, and looks completely ordinary. But then you flip it over and see the date, 1988. You hesitate for a second. Because what if that tiny coin, the one everyone else walks past, is actually hiding something valuable? Sounds unlikely, right? But in the world of coin collecting, that's exactly how some of the most interesting discoveries begin. The 1988 penny might look like just another common coin, but once you understand its story, and more importantly, what to look for, it becomes a lot more interesting than you'd expect. Let's go back for a moment. In 1988, pennies were being produced by the United States Mint in massive numbers. Billions of coins rolled out of the presses that year, continuing the long-running Lincoln cent design featuring Abraham Lincoln on the front. By this time, the composition had already changed. Since 1982, pennies were no longer mostly copper, they were made of zinc with a thin copper coating. That means your 1988 penny is lightweight compared to older ones. Now here's the part most people focus on first. Because so many were made, most 1988 pennies are only worth their face value, just 1 cent. Maybe 2 or 3 cents if someone wants it for a collection. And that's why people ignore them. But here's where things start to change. Because even in a year with billions of coins, small differences can make a big impact. And the 1988 penny has one of those differences. This is where things get interesting. There's a rare variety known as the 1988 reverse of 1989 penny. At first glance, it looks completely normal. But if you look closely at the back of the coin, the Lincoln Memorial side, you'll notice subtle differences in the lettering, especially in the word America. The shape and spacing of the letters are slightly different from the standard 1988 design. This happened because some 1988 pennies were accidentally struck using dies intended for 1989. A small mistake at the mint, but a big deal for collectors. Because that tiny design difference makes the coin rare. And rarity creates value. Now, how much are we talking? A normal 1988 penny? 1 cent. A 1988 reverse of 1989 penny? That can sell for $100 to $300 or more depending on condition. High-grade examples, coins that are nearly perfect, have sold for even higher prices at auction. All because of a small detail most people would never notice. Now imagine finding that in your change. But that's not the only thing to look for. Like many coins, the 1988 penny can also have mint errors. For example, off-center strikes. This happens when the coin isn't properly aligned during minting, and part of the design is shifted or missing. These coins can be worth $20 to over $100 depending on how dramatic the error is. Then there's doubling. Look closely at the date, 1988, the word liberty, and in God we trust. If you see a shadow-like effect or doubling of the letters, you might have a double die coin. These can be worth anywhere from $20 to several $100s depending on how clear the doubling is. There are also clipped planchets, coins with a piece missing from the edge due to a cutting error. And die cracks, thin raised lines caused by cracks in the minting die. Each of these errors adds uniqueness to the coin, and that's exactly what collectors look for. Now let's talk about condition. Because even without rare varieties or errors, condition matters. A worn 1988 penny that's been in circulation for decades is usually worth face value. But a bright, uncirculated coin, one that looks almost brand new, can be worth $1 to $5 or more. And if it's graded at the highest levels, like MS67 or above, it can sell for $50, $100, or even higher depending on demand. Now here's something important. Not every unusual-looking coin is valuable. Sometimes coins get damaged after they leave the mint, scratches, dents, corrosion. These don't increase value. They usually decrease it. So it's important to learn the difference between real mint errors and damage. Now think about this for a second. Billions of 1988 pennies were made. They've been circulating for over 35 years. They've passed through countless hands. And yet, some of them are still out there with rare varieties or errors. That means, there's still a chance. A chance that one of those coins is sitting in your house right now. In a jar. In a drawer. In your wallet. Imagine finding this in your pocket. A coin you've seen 1,000 times. But this time, you notice something different. A tiny detail. A small variation. Something most people miss. And suddenly, that 1-cent coin becomes something more. That's the excitement. That's what makes coin collecting so addictive. It's not just about money. It's about discovery. So what should you do? Start checking your coins. Look for 1988 pennies. Flip them over. Examine the lettering on the back. Compare it carefully. Look for anything unusual. Because most people will never notice. But now, you know exactly what to look for. And that changes everything. Because the next time you see a penny, you won't just see 1 cent. You'll see possibility. And maybe, just maybe, a hidden treasure waiting to be found. Imagine this: you're about to pay for something small, maybe a cup of tea or a quick snack, and you reach into your pocket. Your fingers brush against a few coins. You pull one out, a simple penny. You barely look at it, but something makes you pause. It's dated 2000. At first, it feels completely ordinary. Just 1 cent, something most people ignore, drop, or leave behind. But what if I told you that this tiny coin, something millions of people overlook every single day, could actually hold hidden value? Not because it's ancient. Not because it's made of gold. But because of the story behind it, the mistakes that can happen during its creation, and the tiny details that most people never notice. This is where things get interesting. Because the 2000 penny is part of a massive production year by the United States Mint. Around the year 2000, the world was entering a new millennium, and the US Mint was producing billions of coins to keep up with demand. Pennies were struck in huge numbers at Philadelphia and Denver, with additional proof coins made in San Francisco. We're talking about billions of coins. That means most 2000 pennies are extremely common. In fact, if you have one in your hand right now, chances are, it's only worth exactly 1 cent. Maybe 2 or 3 cents if someone collects copper-coated zinc coins casually. But here's the twist. In coin collecting, value doesn't come from how many coins exist. It comes from what's different. And sometimes, what's different is almost invisible. Now, before we go deeper into the 2000 penny, there's something important you need to understand. To truly appreciate how valuable a small detail can be, we need to go back for a moment to one of the most famous modern penny errors ever discovered. A mistake that changed how collectors look at coins forever. On certain coins featuring Abraham Lincoln, something unusual appeared. A strange doubling, right on Lincoln's ear. Collectors called it the doubled ear error. At first glance, it looks like nothing. But when you look closer, you notice a clear second outline, almost like a shadow or echo of the ear. This wasn't damage. It wasn't wear. It was a minting error, caused when the die used to strike the coin had a misalignment, creating a doubled image. And suddenly, a 1 cent coin became something collectors were willing to pay hundreds of dollars for. Some circulated examples sold for $50 to $150. Higher grade coins? $300, $500, even over $1,000 in some cases. All because of one tiny detail. Now think about that. A detail most people would never even notice? Turning a coin into something valuable. And this is exactly why the 2000 penny matters. Because even though it doesn't have a famous doubled ear error like earlier years, it exists in the same world. The same minting process. The same possibility for mistakes. Which means, the same opportunity. Imagine finding this in your pocket. A 2000 penny that looks just a little different. Maybe the design isn't perfectly centered. Maybe the letters look slightly doubled. Maybe the edge isn't quite right. Most people would ignore it. But you wouldn't. Because now you know what to look for. Let's talk about what makes the 2000 penny unique. By the year 2000, pennies were made mostly of zinc with a thin copper coating. They were lighter than older coins, cheaper to produce, and designed for everyday circulation. They weren't meant to be rare. They weren't meant to be special. But mistakes don't follow plans. And that's where value can be created. One of the most common and collectible errors is the off-center strike. This happens when the coin isn't properly aligned during the minting process. The result? A design that's shifted, leaving part of the coin blank. Some off-center 2000 pennies have sold for $20, $50, even over $100 depending on how dramatic the error is. The more off-center it is, while still showing the date, the more valuable it becomes. Then there are clipped planchets. This is when the metal blank used to make the coin is cut incorrectly, leaving a curved bite missing from the edge. At first, it might look like damage. But it's not. It's a genuine mint error. And collectors love it. A 2000 penny with a clipped planchet can sell for $10 to $50 or more depending on the size of the clip. Now here's something even more subtle. Die cracks. Over time, the dies used to strike coins can develop tiny cracks. When coins are struck with these cracked dies, the cracks appear as raised lines on the coin. Each one is unique. Like a fingerprint. And while not all die cracks are highly valuable, some collectors actively search for them. Because they tell a story. A story of wear, pressure, and time inside the mint. And then there's doubling. Not always as dramatic as the famous doubled ear. But still important. Sometimes, letters or numbers on a 2000 penny might show slight doubling. It could be on the date. On Liberty. Or on In God We Trust. Most people miss this tiny detail. But collectors don't. And depending on how strong the doubling is, it can increase the coin's value significantly. Now let's talk about condition. Because even without errors, condition matters. A heavily circulated 2000 penny is usually worth face value. But an uncirculated one, bright, shiny, with no wear, can be worth $1 or more. And if it's professionally graded in near-perfect condition, it could go even higher. Proof coins from San Francisco, marked with an S, are also worth more. These coins were made for collectors, with mirror-like surfaces and sharp details. In typical condition, they might sell for a few dollars. But high-grade proofs? They can reach $10 or more. Now here's where the story becomes real. Because these coins aren't locked away in museums. They're not impossible to find. They're still out there. In jars. In drawers. In old collections. In everyday pocket change. And that's what makes this so exciting. Because anyone can look. Anyone can search. Anyone can discover something unexpected. But let's take a moment for a reality check. Because there's a lot of hype online. You've probably seen titles claiming this penny is worth thousands or even millions. The truth? Most 2000 pennies are worth exactly 1 cent. And even error coins don't always sell for huge amounts. Value depends on rarity, condition, and demand. So it's important to stay realistic. But realistic doesn't mean boring. Because even finding a coin worth $20, $50, or $100 from your own pocket change. That's still incredible. That's still a win. And more importantly, it's a story. So how do you actually check your coins? Start simple. Find any 2000 pennies you have. Look just below the date. If there's no mint mark, it's from Philadelphia. If there's a D, it's from Denver. If there's an S, it's a proof coin. Then examine the coin carefully. Use good lighting. If possible, use a magnifying glass. Look for anything unusual. Is the design off-center? Are the letters doubled? Is there a strange line or crack? Is a piece missing from the edge? Take your time. Because the difference between an ordinary coin and a valuable one can come down to a tiny detail. And remember, most people will never check. Most people will never notice. But you're different now. You know what to look for. You understand the possibilities. And that changes everything. Because the next time you see a penny, you won't just see 1 cent. You'll see potential. You'll see history. You'll see a chance. So imagine this one more time. You reach into your pocket. You pull out a coin. It's small. Ordinary. Easy to ignore. But this time, you stop. You look closer. Because maybe, just maybe, that 2000 penny isn't just a penny. And if you enjoyed this, don't stop here. There are more coins out there with hidden value. More stories waiting to be discovered. So go check your coins right now. And who knows? Your next discovery might already be in your hands. Pennies, nickels, nothing special. Then one coin catches your eye. It's a 1985 penny. You almost ignore it, but something tells you to take a closer look. Now here's the crazy part. What if that one tiny coin, the kind most people don't even bother picking up off the ground, could actually be worth far more than 1 cent? Not because it's ancient. Not because it's made of gold. But because of a tiny detail, a mistake, something so small that most people miss it completely. And that's exactly what makes coins like the 1985 penny so fascinating. Because behind something so ordinary, there's a hidden world of history, errors, and unexpected value, all created by the United States Mint. Let's rewind for a moment. The year is 1985. The penny you're holding belongs to the Lincoln Cent series, featuring Abraham Lincoln on the front, a design that has been around since 1909. But by 1985, something important had already changed. Just a few years earlier, in 1982, the composition of the penny shifted from mostly copper to mostly zinc with a thin copper coating. That means your 1985 penny isn't solid copper like older coins. It's lighter, slightly different in feel, and part of a new generation of coins. Now here's something that might surprise you. In 1985, the Mint produced over 11 billion pennies. Let that sink in. Billions. They were made in Philadelphia with no mint mark, in Denver with a D, and in San Francisco with an S for special proof coins. So naturally, most 1985 pennies are extremely common. If you pull one out of your pocket right now, chances are it's only worth 1 cent. Maybe 2 or 3 cents if someone is being generous. And this is where most people stop paying attention. But not collectors. Because collectors know something most people don't. Value isn't just about how many coins were made. It's about what went wrong. Now here's where things get really interesting. You might have heard about the famous double-ear penny, a strange-looking coin where Lincoln's ear appears to have a shadow or second outline. That error actually comes from 1984, not 1985. And this is important, because many people confuse the 2 years. They see a 1985 penny, notice something unusual, and assume they've found the rare doubled ear. But here's the truth. A true doubled ear error like the 1984 version is not known for 1985 in the same dramatic way. And this is where a lot of misinformation spreads online. But don't click away, because that doesn't mean the 1985 penny is boring. Far from it. Because even without that famous error, the 1985 penny still has its own hidden surprises. And if you know what to look for, you might still find something valuable. Let's talk about condition first. Because this is one of the biggest factors in a coin's value. A typical 1985 penny that's been in circulation for decades will show wear, scratches, dull color, faded details. These are usually worth face value. But if you happen to find one that looks almost brand new, bright, shiny, with sharp details, that's a different story. Collectors call this uncirculated or mint state. And depending on how perfect it is, a 1985 penny in high mint state condition could be worth anywhere from $1 to $10, sometimes more if it's graded at the highest levels. In fact, top-grade examples graded MS67 or higher have sold for hundreds of dollars at auction. Yes, hundreds. All because they survived decades without damage. Now think about that. A coin worth 1 cent? Becoming worth hundreds? Just because of its condition. But condition is only part of the story. Because the real excitement comes from errors. And the 1985 penny has several types you should definitely watch for. Let's start with off-center strikes. This happens when the coin isn't properly aligned when it's struck by the machine. The design ends up shifted, leaving part of the coin blank. Some of these errors are subtle, but others are dramatic. And the more dramatic the error, the more valuable the coin. A 1985 penny with a strong off-center strike can sell for $20, $50, even over $100 depending on how extreme it is. Now imagine finding one of those in your pocket change. This is where things get interesting. Because most people would never even notice it. They'd think it's just damaged. But collectors know better. Another type of error to look for is doubling. Not the famous doubled ear, but more subtle forms of doubling in the letters or numbers. Look closely at the date, 1985. Look at the word liberty. Look at in God we trust. Do you see any signs of doubling? Any shadow-like effect? If you do, you might have a double die coin. These can be worth anywhere from $20 to several $100s depending on how clear the doubling is. Then there are clipped planchets. This is when a piece of the coin is missing from the edge, not because it was damaged later, but because of an error during the cutting process at the mint. These coins have a very distinct look. And collectors love them. A 1985 penny with a clipped planchet could easily sell for $10 to $50 or more. There are also die cracks, thin raised lines on the coin caused by cracks in the minting die. While some are minor, others are more noticeable and collectible. And then there are proof coins. If you find a 1985 penny with an S mint mark and a mirror-like finish, you might have a proof coin. These were specially made for collectors, not for circulation. In typical condition, they're worth a few dollars. But in perfect condition, especially if graded, they can be worth significantly more. Now let's take a moment for a reality check. Because this is important. Not every 1985 penny is valuable. In fact, most of them are not. And that's okay. Because the goal isn't to assume every coin is worth a fortune. The goal is to understand what makes certain coins special. And to know what to look for. Because once you know, you start seeing things differently. You stop ignoring coins. You start examining them. And suddenly, something as ordinary as a penny becomes interesting. Now think about this. Billions of 1985 pennies were made. They've been circulating for decades. They've passed through millions of hands. And yet, some of them are still out there with errors, with high-grade condition, with unique characteristics. Which means, there's still a chance. A chance that one of those coins is sitting in your house right now. In a jar. In a drawer. In your wallet. Imagine finding this in your pocket. A coin you've seen 1,000 times. But this time, you notice something different. A small detail. A tiny mistake. Something most people would miss. And suddenly, that 1-cent coin isn't just a coin anymore. It's a discovery. That's what makes this so exciting. It's not just about money. It's about the hunt. The curiosity. The possibility. So here's what you should do next. Grab any 1985 pennies you can find. Check the date carefully. Look for the mint mark, no mark, D, or S. Examine the coin under good lighting. Look closely at the edges, the lettering, the overall shape. Ask yourself, does anything look unusual? Is the design off-center? Are the letters doubled? Is there a piece missing from the edge? Most people miss this tiny detail. But now you won't. And that changes everything. Because once you start looking, you never look at coins the same way again. And who knows? Maybe one day, you'll be the one telling a story about how you found something rare in the most unexpected place. So the next time you see a penny, don't ignore it. Pick it up. Look at it. Because even a simple 1985 penny could be more than just 1 cent. And if you enjoyed this, stick around, because there are more coins out there hiding incredible secrets, and your next discovery might be closer than you think.